Hi everyone, Sane Man here. This video is brought to you by a donation from James, and here's what he has to say. Hi Sane Man, I recently conducted an interview with Dr. Peterson, who's been involved in a controversy regarding gender pronouns. The interview has been well praised, and I would be interested in having you comment on the video as we touch upon some MGTOW issues. Dr. Peterson was recently on Joe Rogan and several other media sources, but this is the first time I believe he was actually asked about these kinds of issues. Well, James, thanks for your donation as well as your topic request. And just so everyone knows where you're coming from, I've decided to put that interview that you did in the description below as the first link. The way I interpreted your interview was that it's actually a conversation between two men from two different generations, even though both of you don't seem to be that far apart with regards to age. James, you question the nature of reality with regards to male-female relationships, and then Jordan Peterson says, all you need is traditionalism. No wonder rebel media and the men's rights movement love Peterson so much. It's as though he's projecting their ideas with regards to the agenda of the nuclear family and traditionalism. Peterson could easily be great pals with Gavin McInnes. Peterson is also promoting NoFap and thinks that it's actually about short-term gratification. He's right about traditionalism to a certain extent, but there's no way to tie yourself down safely into a relationship these days. The gun is loaded and pointed at your face as a man, and the game is rigged. I can't believe how blind Peterson is to how a man can't win in this rigged system. But he says just do it anyway, take the risk, bet on red, spin the wheel, and simply hope for the best. Then when you lose your shorts, at least you took the risk. That's the way I see his philosophy. But for the rest of this talk, I want to discuss the specific points you brought up first, give you my analysis, and then bring up Peterson's points the same way, and also go over them. So James, first you discuss your experience as a divorced father dating at the age of 40. You say that people these days using Tinder and other apps will date someone for 10 minutes, and then the moment they see some sort of flaw, they'll often chuck them and basically go to the next person. You say that people in society, thanks to all these new dating technologies, act in a disposable way and operate only on surface level. I've talked about Tinder before and how it's creating this disposable society that we live in and giving people plenty of options. I'll put a link to that particular video in the description called Women in Technology, so you can hear about what I think about this. You also mentioned your 2.5-year-old daughter, that you don't have custody of her and probably have to pay child support and alimony. So that's why I think you brought up the topic of MGTOW. I think you're either going your own way or very close to becoming a full MGTOW. There was also another thing that you and Peterson talked about that was really interesting. It's this idea that Carl Jung puts out there that marriage is a permanent way to basically tie you down, and therefore you couldn't get out of it, so it forced you to work hard in the past, and that work provides meaning. You also briefly discussed the state taking taxes from men and then giving it to the welfare princesses to support their kids. The people from broken homes are having children while the rest of the society isn't. The hard-working taxpayers are getting the short end of the stick. Then around the 32-minute mark, you actually brought up MGTOW and how the family courts are rigged so men aren't getting married anymore. You also brought up dating single mothers. Oh my god, why would you actually ever date a single mother? But when you did that, you actually learned something very important, that single mothers are coddling their kids. The reason I see single mothers doing this is to stunt the development of those children, so instead they become codependent. The woman wants their kids to be forever dependent on them. They want a son that's like Peter Pan. The topic also went in the direction of women living lonely lives because they dated but never settled down or had families, and because of that I strongly believe the rich independent MGTOWs out there will probably be living longer than the poor cat ladies. So sad, too bad for the cat ladies. James, I have to commend you on the discussion and what you brought up in this video, although I don't think you actually got through to Peterson. And you didn't do this even though you talked about your 2.5-year-old daughter. I can see your motivation for going your own way, which is all about losing your family. I can see you're going to be a future man going his own way, so long as you can stay away from the single moms. But you're just scratching the surface when it comes to MGTOW. We aren't just going our own way because of the bad marriage deal. We're also doing it because of female nature itself. Women don't seem to treat us very well and manipulate us in covert ways, and then destroy our self-esteem and beat us down mentally and emotionally into plow horses. I'm also glad you're more interested in talking about the MGTOW movement more than the MRA. But from the way that Peterson was speaking, it sounds to me like he would make a fine MRA. James, I also found it disturbing that you agree with the first two phases of feminism. That's wrong because once women were given the vote, that was the beginning of the end because they voted for all those social programs that are destroying society that you talked about earlier. If you give them that one little thing, they'll vote everything else into existence. I also found your discussion on this idea that if a man can't find a suitable mate, they often tend to radicalize and do crazy things to basically up their status. Selling drugs and other illegal activities, to be specific. Peterson even says that the rise of ISIS could be a quest for adventure in young men who seek status in Islam. Elliot Rodger is also a perfect example of this, and as Peterson says, some men pick infamy instead of invisibility. Finally, you also spoke about what a valuable thing it is for people to basically let go of their darkness in the past. I often get accused of continuing to spew red pill rage by making these videos, which is more about my OCD than anything else. You also brought up something else that's really interesting. People don't see that they won't be able to do the things they want to do in their 40s and beyond, like you mentioned, so the fear of not doing something in the end can actually be greater than the fear of doing it and failing. That's a powerful message I completely agree with as well. As for Professor Jordan Peterson, he makes some valid points like, a life with no long-term relationships or medium-term goals is empty and anxiety-filled. That's when he goes all tradcon and advocates that a man build a relationship with a woman, and this finally reveals the generational differences between you and himself. His argument is that two brains are better than one when it comes to raising a family. But I say it's impossible to do this in this day and age. He says that we're creating an immature culture and that once again Carl Jung saw the necessity of marriage. If you don't tie yourself down, you can't run away, which means you basically have to reveal yourself. That may be true for men that choose to get married and have kids these days, but it's not true for the women. Women don't tie themselves to anyone, and they always have the option to leave with little to no consequences. In fact, if they leave, they often end up with benefits. The man still does take a chance so the relationship is meaningful to him. So when a man loses that meaningful relationship, we can see why men are more likely to commit suicide. But the bottom line for me is that Dr. Jordan Peterson sounds very blue pill to me. He's an idealist in a perverted world where idealists are being punished in family courts. He also understands that there will be a breakdown in the next generation because of single-parent households. He says that marriage is a luxury that's reserved for the rich. I tend to agree with this as well because wealthy men can pretty much do the same thing over and over again and keep making mistakes, and they keep getting remarried and having more kids. Wealth, it seems, removes consequences. But the bottom line, once again, is that Peterson is a traditionalist and says to raise a family with two parents. And also that being old and isolated sucks. In his own words, if you don't have kids, what's there to sustain you as you get older? That's a very interesting theory, but it goes against the evidence that I see in my own life with regards to people that made it over 90 years of age. In my circle of family friends, there is no one that actually made it over the age of 90 that was still married. The stress of being single is far less than the stress of being in a relationship. I can see that in my life and my parents' older friends as well as some family members. But getting back to MGTOW, Peterson says that many men end up in the financial burden state with no access to their kids after divorce, laying down the negatives, but he still supports family values. I found that to be very paradoxical. He also says there's no data on MGTOW, although he's seeing it popping up all over the internet. Peterson thinks that the result of our current gynocracy is that in the end, many women will compete with each other for the few men that still have resources and status, while the rest of the men will have to be content with pornography and other distractions. Sexual opportunities will increase for rich alpha males. Women will be chasing such men, but the average and below average guys will be TFL jerking off at their computers. I don't think he's really thought about the reality of sex robots or artificial wombs yet. These two technologies would change everything that he's talking about and make it a lot less relevant. I do agree with Peterson when he says that it's better to have a faulty goal in life than no goal in life instead. I agree with him so long as that goal is not marriage. But as I was saying, he's a traditionalist. Anyways, James, I also think you brought up some interesting points about dating women in their 30s and 40s. The single mother thing is just the tip of the iceberg. Over the last few years, I've been dating women that never had children, and they were actually in their 30s and 40s. And in some ways, the women that have kids means that they could actually keep a man around long enough without making him go completely crazy. The ones that never had kids were probably worse than the ones that did and couldn't keep a man around long enough to sire a child with her. He probably thought to himself, why the hell would I want to have kids with this crazy woman? And he simply bolted for the door. And then I ended up dating them. That's one of the reasons I think that many single mothers have for sticking around in the dating pool in their 30s and 40s with children. They know they probably aren't as badly damaged as some of the single women out there that have never had kids before. But even still, that doesn't actually make it a good idea to go out with them. There's a reason they are with the fathers of their children. For the majority of them, not sticking around with their kid's father is their own fault because they were probably trying to monkey branch to someplace else. So that means that your odds of finding a woman in her 30s and 40s that isn't going to treat you like dirt and doesn't have children already is like looking for a quarter in a roll of pennies. It isn't going to happen, and if you do find a woman at that age that's dateable, and that either doesn't treat you like garbage and hasn't had children yet, then you need to bag her and tag her ass and bring her here on YouTube so we can study that stuff more closely. Finding a woman is like shopping. If you don't show up early and line up while you're still in your late teens and early 20s, then it's probably never going to happen. Today, women are using these dating apps in their teens and getting so much attention that they're getting emotionally damaged at a much younger age. They know they have more options younger, and they will treat men even more disposably than previous generations. When attractive men are relatively hard to find, women would think twice before dumping them, but now they can actually dump the guy and be on the prowl for the next victim almost immediately. Crazy as it might sound, men are more disposable than ever, unless of course he's one of those few so-called perfect men out there. Then he's coveted by the vast majority of women out there. He can be as choosy as he wants as well. I think that Jordan Peterson is right about most men relying on pornography, and when the sex robots eventually show up, choosy alpha males will probably choose to be part of a robot orgy, and women will really be pooched. Then almost no men will want them. Maybe the only types of guys left to basically date at that point will be cheap guys that can't afford robots, or the homeless. Maybe those will be the best that women can do in the future. Anyways, that's all I've got to say for today. Thanks again, James, for your donation, as well as sharing this video. It's the first link in the description. And if everyone wants to listen to some educational and entertaining content for men going their own way, then I suggest you subscribe to James's channel. James, maybe one day we can actually talk online. Also, don't forget to check out the MGTOW mystery link and like this video. As for everyone else out there, please follow me on Twitter or like me on Facebook to get tomorrow's video today. Thanks for taking your daily dose of red pills. And remember, a red pill a day keeps the trad cons away. So enjoy the rest of your day, and cheers.